The clock's running out on December deal drops at Lowe's, but there's still time to wrap up something they'll love. Shop great gifts under $50, like the DeWalt Elite Series 100-piece bit set. Plus, if you order by 2 p.m., you get same-day delivery by 8 p.m. Shop December deal drops while you can. Lowe's. We help, you save.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
The term lager is likely to conjure up images of a pale beer with a relatively light malt character that's balanced by some degree of noble hop presence. This makes sense considering Pilsner is the most popular style of beer in the world, despite the fact a much darker lager holds the title of longest continuously brewed style. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss the deliciously dark classic German lager known as Schwarzbier is contributor Will Lovell.
Yeah, I think it's really funny that there's just this kind of general consensus amongst like the beer drinking world, especially those that aren't into craft beer, that dark beers are like heavy and they're like, you know, they're not easy to drink and all of those kind of like generalizations. And maybe if the only dark beer you ever drank was a barrel-aged stout, yeah, that's kind of true. But Schwarzbier is like the antithesis of that. And so I'm glad we're talking about this delectably crushable dark lager that I have drank quite a bit of. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah, man, I agree. When I think about dark beers or people who may not be as accustomed to beer as you and me and people listening to this show, I think there's another association, and that has to do with flavor and aroma. And Schwarzbier, yet again, just kind of flips all of that on its head. It doesn't really share much, except for the color, with stout and porter and those other more familiar dark beers. So just an all-around great beer. Now, at this point, I trust most of our listeners, at least those who have been around long enough, are aware of my love of all things lager. Well, Schwarzbier holds an extra special place in my heart, not only because it's a delicious style that you can drink pint after pint any time of year, but because it was one of the first lagers I ever made using these less than traditional methods. So every time I brew one or drink one, it's sort of this nostalgic experience. It takes me back to those early days of Brülosophy. I love the style, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it with you today, Will. All right, if you're a fan of this show and would like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, invitations to monthly live brew days with Brülosophy contributors. This month, that contributor happens to be the co-host of this episode, Will Lovell, who's an absolute hoot. Y'all are going to have fun attending that brew day, as well as a smattering of other prizes. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And while we're on that subject, I just want to quickly give some love to all of our patrons who, after I shared with them some of what's been going on behind the scenes here at Brülosophy with our sponsorships and the stuff that makes the business run, namely the loss of even more sponsors due to the current industry struggles, some of these folks responded in ways that were really validating, I guess, from messaging us words of support to increasing their existing pledge amounts. It really is motivating to know that there are people out there who appreciate what we're doing so much, that it really, like I said, it just motivates us to want to keep doing it. The truth is times are tough right now. And while we've been hit pretty hard by this downturn in beer and brewing, just like everyone else in the industry, we are committed to keeping this ship afloat. And the only way that's possible at this point truly is through the support of our patrons. So on behalf of myself, the entire Brülosophy crew, and everybody listening to this episode who isn't currently a patron, thank you to our current patrons. You are the reason that we're able to keep doing this. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for that referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that as well. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger, like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Sean Bernard emailed us after listening to a recent episode where Andy and I shared our views on wort chilling. Andy said, I've been brewing for 2 years now, and I'm deep into the hobby. I started out with an old kit I bought on Facebook Marketplace with a kegel and plate chiller, but I only brewed on that a couple times before graduating to an electric all-in-one system that came with a brand spanking new stainless immersion chiller. And it worked great, but I somehow convinced myself I needed a fancy counterflow chiller because it seemed like every, quote, serious home brewer had one. I ran a couple of batches through the chiller and everything was going great. I always ran hot water and PBW through it after a brew day, but I'll admit to maybe being a little lax with cleaning up right away. On my third batch using the new counterflow chiller and Irish Red Ale, I did like I always did and cycled the boiling wort through the CFC to sanitize it before chilling the wort down at the end of the boil. To my horror, a giant slug of brownish black gunk spewed out of the chiller and immediately sank to the bottom of my precious wort, never to be seen again. What went unseen, though, did not go untasted. The finished beer had a distinct sour undertone. It was by far the most unpopular beer I've made to date, especially after I warned everyone that I'd invented a new style of beer, the Irish Sour. Anyway, that experience made me swear off chillers that can't be seen to be clean. I've gone back to using the immersion chiller and don't mind spending the extra 10 minutes it takes to cool down the wort. Thanks for your awesome podcast and YouTube videos. They've been indispensable helping me learn to brew. Well, thank you, Sean. Will, have you used one of these counterflow chillers that's maybe not a plate chiller? And what has your experience been?
So I've actually kind of avoided the counterflow and plate chiller because, again, I am freaked out by the unseen. And there's something about, like, even if there's a little bit of like oxidation on the outside of my immersion chiller, I know that it's going to get boiled for 10 minutes before anything happens. And so anything that lives on there should die pretty readily. And I feel like with brands out there like Jaded and some of those guys, like, you can really cool stuff down at least to groundwater temperature really fast. And so I haven't had any complaints about getting my wort down to at least, a little bit above groundwater temperature in a pretty short order and pretty short amount of time. So I've like heard the horror stories with the plate chillers, and the counterflow always feels or seems like a good idea, except for like you said, that big thing of sludge always just kind of worries me there, like what could be lurking inside. And so I kind of have intentionally avoided all of that and just stuck with good old immersion chillers. It's what I know. It's easy, and I know exactly what's on the outside of it because you can see it. Yeah.
A couple of things I want to say to Sean. The first one is that your experience is very similar to mine, though. I'd never experienced that with a counterflow chiller, just the plate chiller. I found that your standard kind of, counterflow chillers that have the plastic tube on the outside with something metal on the inside, that whole thing is a bit easier to clean, but I'm a nut when it comes to cleanliness. I always clean up right after I'm done brewing. I don't let it sit out for a night or anything like that. But where we differ is that I actually chill faster with an immersion chiller. It sounds like you do too, Will. But I'm using, very specific techniques in doing that. For example, I'm running my water through the chiller at full blast, and I am constantly agitating either the wort or moving the chiller around in that wort. And I'm telling you, especially during the cooler months where my groundwater is cold, I can chill, a 10-gallon batch of wort in under 10 minutes. And we're talking down to like pitching temps. So, if you do it right, I think you might see that your performance on that immersion chiller improves. It could also be that the immersion chiller that came with whatever unit you're talking about, Sean, just doesn't have that many coils or doesn't have all of the fancy stuff that something like a Jaded Brewing immersion chiller. I've got their King Cobra, which is great for shallow batches, and then also their Hydro, which is very, very popular. Two awesome wort chillers that I absolutely stand by and will continue to keep using because I'm not really an immersion chiller guy. So, but thank you so much for the feedback. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right, don't forget to pick up your very own Brülosophy merch. Whether you're looking to warm up with a hoodie, cool down with a tank top, or just look cool, or like a beer nerd, we've got something for everyone. Hell, we're even offering things like throw pillows and tote bags and tapestries, whatever those are. We've done our best to keep prices reasonable, and our merch can be shipped internationally. Check out everything we have to offer at brülosophy.com/shop. That's brülosophy.com/SHOP. You can click one of the product images. It will redirect you to our Dashery store at brülosophy.dashery.com. We've put the link to that in the description of this episode, so you can just easily click it and do your shopping. We will be right back.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. Why do you guys think you win so many cases?
The insurance companies and other companies that we go against know that we're going to take it to the end, that we believe in the case. So we fight for every dollar, and we're not afraid to go that extra mile for our clients.
Are insurance companies actually afraid of you guys?
We don't bluff. We take it to trial, and we are not strangers of getting very, very, very large verdicts.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. And our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
12 years ago, in November of 2013, I was invited to my friend's brewery. This was Tommy Caprellian from House of Pendragon, to try some new beers he was planning to release soon. You know, back then the brewery was still relatively new. He liked to have his friends come in and kind of test out some ideas that he was brewing. And one of those beers on this particular night was a Schwarzbier. Now, I recall trying versions of this style before this point. It wasn't an unfamiliar style to me, but something about this sample of that House of Pendragon Schwarzbier just got me. This juxtaposition of an opaquely black beer with subtle roast flavors that was also crisp and highly drinkable. I was absolutely hooked and immediately went home to design my own recipe, which I brewed like 2 days later. 5 weeks after that, while hanging Christmas lights on my house, my good friend Tim, whom you all know very well, came down to assist me, which really was just an excuse to have a few beers. I poured him a pint of my freshly kegged Schwarzbier. I think it'd been on tap for 5 or 6 weeks, or at least lagering for 5 or 6 weeks. And his view of dark beers as being, like you said earlier, Will, this rich, roasty, coffee-like, meal in a glass, basically completely changed. He could not believe that he was enjoying this light, crisp, dark lager that I had made in my garage. And so every time I have a Schwarzbier till this day, the flavor combination, that smell, the experience of drinking one always takes me back to that simple little 15 minutes in my garage, which I don't even live there anymore. So even better. And the memory of just kind of kicking it in my garage on a cold evening with my buddy Tim, drinking this newfangled style for him. That's where I'm at today. I love Schwarzbier, and I'm going to say that a lot in this episode. It's one of those styles that I constantly reach for. If I see one on tap, I'm going for it. But it's far more than just a tasty beverage. It actually has quite a bit of really interesting history behind it.
Yeah, you say newfangled style there. I guess you're referencing to Tim, but it was, basically it's noted that the first beer that was specifically documented as black in color was back in 1390, so newfangled, as you would say. Though considering how beer is brewed that long ago, it probably tasted a bit different. It probably used ale yeast and some other things, but it still predates Pale Pilsner by over 400 years, making it one of the longest continuously brewed styles. And then in the mid-16th century, the German town of Bad Kostritz, where Kostritzer is made, a brewery was started that focused entirely on making Schwarzbier, which they called Kostritzer, as I just mentioned. And this beer is still available today. And I'm here to tell you, I lived in Germany for 3 years, as many of you know. I've talked about on this podcast. And Kostritzer was like one of my favorite go-to beers, and it's so easy to find. It's in like every grocery store and Getränkemarkt that you could go to, and I'm here to tell you, I absolutely love this beer style and all of its just kind of turning everything on its head. So thank you to those mid 16th century people that made Bad Kostritzer, and just in Bad Kostritzer they kept making this style go. And so again, is probably almost certainly made with ale yeast, but somewhere after lager started taking off with those pilsners, it started using lager yeast somewhere around the mid 19th century. So that's probably when it got more of that lager character going with it. And then after that, the World Wars in Europe. Unfortunately, Bad Kostritz was on the East German side, but still, the government managed to nationalize the Kostritzer brewery and still export Schwarzbier, which kind of preserved the brand. So that's pretty awesome. Way to go. One good thing for East Germany.
Yeah, I thought that tidbit was really interesting as well, that in a weird way, we say unfortunately it was in East Germany because democracy was on the west side and all that. But because of that export, this style of beer overall was just kind of losing popularity because pale lagers were becoming all the rage. I mean, they were all the rage during the World Wars. But because of the East Germans' decision to distribute it and, internationally, apparently, it kind of kept this brand alive. And to this day, you can go find Kostritzer. I don't know, how common it is right now, but I was able to buy a 6-pack of Kostritzer just 4 or 5 years ago at my local Bevmo. And it's great. Now, if you have the opportunity to drink fresh Kostritzer in Germany or on tap somewhere, in my experience, it is a different experience than pouring it out of the bottle. I do tend to get that. I don't want this to sound like I'm overly, embellishing this, but it does have a little bit of a metallic thing that I get out of the bottle. Still absolutely fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But when it's fresh off tap, it is absolutely delicious.
So fun experiment. So we lived in Germany, right? And so and my wife was in the army, so we could go on the military installation and buy Kostritzer from the gas station there, which was in different bottles and packaged for American distribution. So who knows how far that traveled before it wound up in that gas station. Or we could go on the economy in Germany and buy it kind of fresh bottles of it. And I'm here to tell you the taste difference between the whatever was sitting on base at the gas station and the bottles that you would get from the Getränkemarkt or Globus or wherever you were doing your shopping. It was there. And that kind of that little bit of metallic that you're talking about, somehow it oxidizes that way. So yeah, getting it fresh, either fresh bottles in country or getting it fresh on tap somewhere is the way to really enjoy a nice Schwarzbier there. So the Kostritzer, again, you could get it both places, but on the economy was way better.
Yeah. Now we're focusing right now just on Kostritzer. There's obviously different commercial examples of Schwarzbier out there. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now to break down a bit about this style, at least based on the way the BJCP describes it, which I think helps us to coalesce around some ideas about styles. They describe Schwarzbier as a dark German lager that balances roasted yet smooth malt flavors with moderate hop bitterness, the lighter body dryness, a lack of a harsh, burnt, or heavy aftertaste helps make this beer quite drinkable. In terms of the appearance, they say that it's medium to very dark brown in color, often with deep ruby to garnet highlights, yet almost never truly black. Very clear, large, persistent tan colored head. I would say that that's right on with pretty much with the Schwarzbier that I've made. Though I have made some examples of Schwarzbier that taste, in my opinion, excellent, that don't have or that are very dark, that are almost like a stout dark. What about you, Will? Have you seen or brewed Schwarzbier that's that dark?
So I've done some Schwarzbier experiments, and that's a different episode, right? But I've definitely kind of playing around with some ingredients, made it very black. And if you're using the right ingredients, you can still avoid kind of the really like roasty, acrid flavors. But the reality is the ones that are really awesome to look at is when you hold them up to the glass, you just get ruby garnet highlight through that like deep brown, almost black kind of color. But yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be opaque. Although I have messed up and done that. But as long as it kind of looks apart, a Schwarzbier, Schwarz literally means black. So obviously they're going a really dark brown to black kind of appearance.
Yeah, and I would say that my go-to house Schwarzbier, which I call May the Schwarzbier with you. Here's the thing. I'm sure a lot of people call theirs that. I love Spaceballs. I would say it's more on the line of dark brown, but it's just so dark compared to like a Pilsner that I'll refer to it as inky black or dark black. It may not be quite as dark as a Guinness, but needless to say, they're still very, very dark. I would contend that my Schwarzbier at least is maybe just a hint darker than say a Munich Dunkel. Which to me kind of leans more into the brown as opposed to the black, but 6 in one, half dozen in the other. You're going to make what you make, and so it's going to be dark regardless. Aromatically, the BJCP describes Schwarzbier as having a low to moderate malt with low aromatic malty sweetness and hints of roast malt often apparent. The malt can be clean and neutral or moderately rich and bready and may have a hint of dark caramel. The roast character can be somewhat dark chocolate or coffee-like, but should never be burnt. A moderately low spicy floral or herbal hop aroma is optional. Clean lager yeast character in the aroma. The flavor follows really closely behind that, light to moderate malt flavor, which can have a clean, neutral character, to a moderately rich, bready malt quality. Light to moderate roasted malt flavors can give a bitter chocolate palate that's never burnt. Medium low to medium bitterness, light to moderate spicy floral or herbal hop flavor, clean lager character, dry finish. Some residual sweetness is acceptable, but not traditional. And the aftertaste of hot bitterness with a complementary should be complementary, but subtle roastiness in the background. Those to me match the whole thing of Schwarzbier altogether, and how similar aroma and flavor are in that. But what do you say?
I get the impression that it should never be burnt after you're reading through this, because they mention that over and over and over again, and they're spot on. Like, you want kind of maybe that dark chocolate or a little bit of coffee in there, but you should never have that kind of acrid or like roasty burnt character that kind of maybe people might confuse with phenolic. Like, it should really just be kind of like for lack of a better word, if it is like a stout, it's with the volume turned way down on all that roasty character, and it should just be a very nice, balanced, lovely beer. And there can be some hop bitterness to complement the subtle roastiness in the background, but you really just want something that's going to drink very refreshing, give you some of those flavors that are familiar in stout, like, that kind of like coffee, chocolate, maybe a little bit of dark caramel, but then you want that to be gone from your palate and you want to be super crushable. So all of this kind of lines up with that. And that burnt component 100% should never be there. You should never have so much of your dark malts that it's turning acrid or burnt or any of those things. And so more emphasis on the never burnt.
Yeah, I was going to say, they make very clear that this style should not taste burnt. but it's okay to have some of those flavors that you associate with roasted grains, like chocolatey, dark chocolate. To me, I just refer to it as this malty depth. It's different than just pale malt or Pilsner malt. We talked about mouthfeel earlier and how, you see a black beer and you're like, oh my God, that's going to be so thick and so rich. Schwarzbier should have a medium light to medium body, moderate to moderately high carbonation, smooth, no harshness or astringency despite the use of dark roasted malt. So I feel like that was the BJCP's way of kind of slipping in that, yet again, like, this is not supposed to taste like a porter or a stout. Don't use those dark grains to get that color, but use it judiciously so that you get the color and a little bit of that richer character without getting the burnt coffee-like stuff. It's such an interesting style for that reason. We're going to talk about ways that you go about achieving this, or at least that have been purported to go about achieving this without making basically a lagered stout. So in terms of vital statistics for Schwarzbier, you're looking at between 1046 to 1052 OG, 1010 to 1016 FG for a final ABV of between 4.4 to 5.4% alcohol. IBU should be between 20 and 35. And then SRM, the color of that beer, should be between 19 and 30. Again, those aren't terribly specific. I've made Schwarzbier that is a little bit lower than 1046 and a little bit higher than 1052 OG. That's all good. They're just trying to provide us kind of the bumper lanes on when you're playing bowling, So
I think the big thing there is, like, you want to get around that 4.5-5% ABV, somewhere in there, because again, it is supposed to be kind of a crushable, delicious lager, even though it is a dark beer. So I think as long as you can get that like 4.5-5% ish area, those OGFG stats don't matter quite as much. But yeah, just crushable, delicious beer. Get them right there in that niche there.
Yeah, we've had Brews Views episodes on this in the past. I am wholly of the belief that what makes a beer is the person perceiving it, or what makes a style is the way the person perceives it, not the exact way that the brewer went about making it. So if you're outside of any of those stats that the BJCP provides, but you still call it a Schwarzbier, and the person drinking it still experiences it as a Schwarzbier, then call it a Schwarzbier. I don't care. But that is what the BJCP provides. Now, when you think about Schwarzbier and the traditional ingredients that were used to make it, it's not going to be that surprising, I don't think, with maybe one exception. So, the vast majority of the base malt is going to be Pilsner and or Munich malt. This is a style that can take a little bit more rich malt character. And so I get, I've seen recipes where people are using like 30, 40, maybe even 50% Munich malt. Do it to it if that's what you like. I tend to go with more Pilsner and then a smaller amount of Munich malt, almost like it's a specialty malt, but just to add a little layer of more richness in there. But I think the key and what you're going to hear a lot of people talk about, I promise we're going to get back to this in the next segment, is that rather than using those classic black patent malts or like roasted barley to get that color, they're reaching for a huskless, dark roasted grain, something like a Carafa special malt, which has had the husk removed, or maybe even a midnight wheat. Wheat is a huskless grain. And that will contribute that richness and that dark character with ostensibly without imparting that burnt acridness that you get from what people claim is the burnt husk of those grains.
Right. Yeah. That, to me, that's kind of the big thing, is because, again, we don't want that burnt flavor. And we kind of know, based off of research done out there, that if you remove the husk, it supposedly will get rid of those burnt and astringent, acrid flavors. And so, yes, using something like Carafa Special or Midnight Wheat. One malt that I think is worth mentioning, there's quite a few recipes out there that if you're going a little lighter on the Munich malt, you might be adding in some Cara Munich or some kind of a crystal or caramel malt, to kind of compensate. But that's the only thing. But yeah, definitely those kind of dark roasted malts that aren't giving you those acrid burnt flavors are what you want. Because again, not burnt.
Yeah,
reiterated,
exactly.
I don't know how many times, not burnt.
You don't make a burnt Schwarzbier. The thing is, I've had one and it still tasted pretty good. It was just somebody used some black malt in it, and I was like, it's just a different kind of Schwarzbier. It's a little bit out of style, but hey, it still tasted good. In terms of adjuncts, this is not the kind of style you're going to be throwing in a bunch of adjuncts. So I'm sure there are people out there who have done it, or what you do you. Traditionally, that's not what you're going to be doing to make this style of beer. Hops, you probably already guessed, you're going to be using classic German hop varieties. Any noble hop will do. Tettnanger, Hallertau Mittelfrüh, Spalt, even Satz in a pinch will do just fine. We've got some great, domestic versions of those here in the States that work good. Mount Hood is an excellent hop for something like a Schwarzbier. This is not a hop forward beer. So, you can kind of get away with fudging it on the hop variety that you choose, but you do want to make sure that it has that balanced bitterness. I feel like that's a key component to this style. Now, in terms of yeast, again, people are probably already very well aware with how popular lager brewing is these days, with the strains that are common for this style of beer. Perhaps the most popular lager strain in the world, the Weihenstephan strain, which is Imperial Yeast L13 Global, WLP 830, that's from White Labs German Lager, Fermentus Saf Lager, W3470. These all fall into that Weihenstephaner lager strain. And again, excellent yeast for this style. You could also go with something like my favorite lager yeast, which is the Augustiner strain, which is Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest. Y Yeast sells it as their 2352 Munich Lager 2. And if I'm not mistaken, White Labs has their WLP 860 Munich Lager, which is the same source, at least. There are several other lager yeast. Is there a favorite of yours that I didn't mention yet?
I think that 3470 or the Weihenstephan strain is kind of the easy button, right? Because it's kind of pretty tolerant and usually ferments really clean. And again, you're not really accentuating yeast character per se, but I wouldn't sleep on Augustiner just because, again, it kind of accentuates those malty characters, a lot of those malt forward beers. I think some of the subtleties are probably going to get covered up by some of those dark chocolate and coffee notes that you're going to get. But again, kind of do you. I think probably any lager strain would work. I would be really interested to see about the Modelo strain and see what it does with this kind of style, because I've done it in some Vienna lagers, kind of like a Dos Equis, Dos Equis dark lager. But I think you could probably get away with doing some of those Modelo strains and just see what comes out, and you might get something a little different that's kind of interesting, even though it's less traditional.
Yeah, I've done it before, and it works great. Like you said, the other characteristics of a Schwarzbier, at least relative to, say, a Pilsner or a Helles, I feel like kind of mute whatever characteristics you're getting from these otherwise clean fermenting lager yeast. So take your pick. I think you're going to be happy with the outcome regardless of what lager strain you go with. Now, we're kind of talking about the traditional way or approach to brewing a Schwarzbier. The brewing process would involve using moderately hard water just to keep the acidity from those dark roasted grains in balance. We're not talking about going, Burton-on-Trent water, though that would probably work. I honestly believe so. But slightly higher sulfate to chloride. Again, I do that in all of my Pilsner or my lager beers anyways, because I want to emphasize that crisp drinkability. But again, moderately hard to balanced to neutral, water chemistry is a good thing. Where do you go, when you're brewing a Schwarzbier?
Again, I think most things lager, I want to favor the sulfate just because you want that crisp, dry finish. And we know that using that sulfate, that higher sulfate to chloride ratio will give you that nice, crisp finish on it. I think Burton-on-Trent, there could be fine, but there might be minerality in there that you may not want if you go that heavy on minerals. So I would probably start with kind of a blank slate and then kind of go on the lower end of minerality, but I would definitely favor sulfate on it just to get that nice, crisp, dry finish. Again, you want to get hit with all that nice dark chocolate and kind of coffee flavor, and then you want to have it just rinse your palate at the end, and then you just want to go back in for another sip. At least that's what I want out of my Schwarzbier.
Oh, you and me both, my friend. And when we're talking about more sulfate to chloride, we're looking, if you're looking at a water chemistry calculator, you might go with something like 80 ppm sulfate to 50 ppm chloride. If you were to go balanced, you're looking at, like 80 to 80, and that's totally fine. It's going to work out well for you. You just want a little bit of that hardness to pull down the acidity, or to kind of counter the acidity of those roasted grains. In terms of the mash, you're looking at a traditional 60-minute or longer mash, probably probably around, 148 to 154, which is going to be 65, 66, up to about 67 degrees Celsius. And then you're going to boil that wort for at least 90 minutes. You want to make sure to drive off any DMS that was contributed primarily by the Pilsner malt, if you use Pilsner malt, as well as to achieve adequate isomerization of alpha acids to get that bitterness in the beer. When the boil's over, you're going to quickly chill the wort to ensure a good cold break, and then rack as little trub as possible to the fermentation vessel. And then you're going to pitch a big old slug of yeast, whether that's just a lot of fresh yeast or you're making a starter. And because you're going to be fermenting that beer, between about 46 degrees and 52 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 8 to 11 C. And you're going to ferment it for a good 3 to maybe 5 weeks, depending on that temperature that you choose. And then you maybe warm it up at the end just to drive off any diacetyl that was in there or to ensure that fermentation is complete. But this is a traditional lager. And if you're fermenting with lager yeast, traditionally speaking, you're going to ferment that cool and long. And then once fermentation is complete, you're going to let it sit for another 3 to 6 weeks to lager.
Yeah, that's I don't have patience for that, man, but we'll talk about being impatient. But yeah, that's a long time to wait for a delicious Schwarzbier, in my opinion. But again, that would be the more traditional way to do it. Again, go cold, do a little diacetyl rest, and let it condition for 3 to 6 weeks. But then, the fun thing is, it should be a clear beer, and you're going to have to achieve that through this logging process. Because again, if you're following traditional Reinheitsgebot, not only were you not allowed to treat your water like we talked about earlier, but you're also are having to use maybe chemical filtration or even like mechanical probably goes against some of those rules there. And so you're going to need that 3 to 6 week lagering period just to get to that clear beer. Although if you're really following the Reinheitsgebot, you probably should have skipped the treating of your water and a bunch of other things. So, but I digress.
Yeah, if you're following the Reinheitsgebot, you need to fly over to Bad Kostritz and get their water there. But really, it should be it's a lager. It should be clear. Nobody wants to lift a crisp, clean, hazy lager to their face. At least I don't. So whatever method you could use without. Use gelatin if you want to. I don't think many people care these days. But if you're trying to avoid that, just the time that you're lagering this beer really should result in a really nice, crisp, clean, and clear version of Schwarzbier. You can force carbonate this, or you can naturally condition it. I've not naturally conditioned a Schwarzbier, but for fun, I have naturally keg conditioned. So I did like bottle conditioning in the entire 5-gallon keg of I believe it was a Helles, and it was excellent. I actually liked it a lot better than when I bottle condition beers. I think part of it is that when the whole batch, when you're carbonating the whole batch naturally with sugar, priming sugar, you don't have to use as much sugar. I don't know maybe it's just my brain. I could be biased or whatever, but regardless, carbonate this thing to a nice moderate to moderately high carbonation. Again, lager beers just seem to do well with a bit more bubble. And so make sure you get that in there, and it will contribute that nice crispness. So overall, when we're looking at the style of Schwarzbier, what are we looking for in a good example, Will?
So again, you're just going for a dark lager, maybe not completely black, but very dark brown to almost black, that is absent of burnt flavor. There can be those nice chocolate. You can have a little bit of coffee. But again, you want crisp, refreshing, drinkable, smooth, all that lovely malt flavor. And you want it to be balanced with maybe a lot of moderate hop bitterness. And some commercial examples that are out there. We've been talking about Kostritzer this entire time because that is probably the OG and probably the one that should be talked about a lot. Klumbacher has one, Monshoff has one, Das Schwarz, which is out of Stuttgart, I believe, has one, and I've drank a lot of Das Schwarz because they came in swing top bottles and plastic crates, and so for a home brewer that was still bottle conditioning at the time, like getting swing tops from the store and just paying the cheap deposit, the fond on the bottles was like way cheaper than actually buying swing tops. So I actually came back with like 2 crates of Das Schwarz swing top bottles because I would just go drink Das Schwarz. I'd brew a round of beer in them, and then after I got done, I'd clean them for my homebrew. But then when I got done with them, if I didn't want to clean them or I got lazy, I would just put them back in the crate and then take them back and get my deposit back. Just go buy another crate of Das Schwarz and repeat the process. So if I got lazy, I would do that. U.S. versions, there's a whole lot. Chuckanut has a Schwarzlager. Freem has Schwarzbier. Devil's Backbone Schwarzbier. Even in San Antonio, Roadmap and a few other places have been known to make a Schwarzbier. Longtap has one as well. So they're around. I think as far as like dark lagers, Schwarzbier is probably one of of the most popular dark lagers, other than American dark lager, that you're going to see here in the States, as far as what breweries, craft breweries are going to brew. And so I think that's pretty awesome, because I love Schwarzbier, and again, it seems to be a little bit more popular than some of the Czech dark and other dark lagers that are out there.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I think probably the biggest competitor on the international dark lager front to Schwarzbier is Munich Dunkel, and that's in part because, if I'm not mistaken, styles like Modelo Negra are technically modeled after Dunkel, and so people are a little bit more familiar with that. People who brew, at least. Schwarzbier is my favorite of the dark lagers. I absolutely love it. I think it's one of the only non-Czech lagers that kind of bumps over Czech beer for me, because I love all of the different shades of Czech lager. But again, maybe it's just the nostalgia, so it's a very personal thing for me. But the characteristics that come in a Schwarzbier, and if you live in the Pacific Northwest and you have the opportunity to try Chuckanut or Freem Schwarzbier, my word, you got to do it. It is absolutely phenomenal. Such great analogs to the stuff that I drank during my time in Germany. My time meaning like the 1 week I spent there many years ago. It's so good. It does all of the same stuff my own homemade Schwarzbier does, only better because they're better brewers than me. Absolutely a great style. And the fact that, with the downturn in beer, we're starting to see these less popular styles kind of fall off tap handles. At least that's been my experience. And they're being replaced by things like fruit slushy sours and even more IPA. That's great and all, but man, I want to see more Schwarzbier out there. So the beauty of homebrewing is that if you can't find it out in the wild, you can make your own. Well, since that first batch where I did just that 12 years ago, I've brewed many Schwarzbiers using a mix of traditional and not so traditional methods. But what would happen to a version brewed with the utmost carelessness? We're going to be getting into that when we're back from this break.
Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. Why do you guys think you win so many cases?
The insurance companies and other companies that we go against know that we're going to take it to the end, that we believe in the case. So we fight for every dollar, and we're not afraid to go that extra mile for our clients.
Are insurance companies actually afraid of you guys?
We don't bluff, we take it to trial, and we are not strangers of getting very, very, very large verdicts.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. And our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle, as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. I feel like Schwarzbier is a style most non-obsessed beer drinkers would enjoy, but likely have not heard about, kind of like Tim from the story I told previously. And one way us homebrewers can help with that is by making it ourselves and sharing it with those folks. Though seeing as it's a lager, some might be hesitant to take the leap. Brewing lagers has this, even to this day, I hear from people who are like, I really want to make a Pilsner, I really want to make a Helles, but I don't have the gear to do it. Well, contributor Jason Cipriani was curious how a Schwarzbier that was brewed using short and shoddy methods would turn out. So he did just that a few years ago, and his courage is our gain. Wait till you hear about how his brew day went.
Oh yeah, Jason, he looks like he had one heck of a brew day that he kind of like tied together with making homemade pizza, which is a bold strategy on a short and shot day because these days tend to fly by.
Well, to jump in, just to give Jason some love, he is now, he no longer is in the brewing world. He started a pop-up pizza business, and this was his first pizza that he ever made. I think it's kind of a cool tie-in. So anyways.
Oh, that's a good spinoff. That's why we have Brülosophy coming up on the fringes here. All right, good to go. So he made a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch and a 120 volt electric all-in-one system, and he did do a light sparge. His pre-brew preparation was he collected the fuel volume of filtered water. He made no adjustments to his Colorado drinking water, and then he just heated up the water in the 120 volt unit, and then he weighed out and milled the grain. So for his recipe and process, his grain bill was, pretty standard. Honestly, it was about 62% Pilsner malt, 31% Munich malt, and then he had 3.5% C40 and midnight wheat, which I like the choice of midnight wheat here, Marshall, because I've actually done some experimentation with it, and it is a huskless dark malt because it is wheat, and with wheat the husk just tends to fall off during that process. And so I think it's a pretty solid choice there if you're not going to go with the more traditional carafe special.
Yeah, I'm also, there's going to be people saying, what, he put, crystal malt in a Schwarzbier. Trust me, it works. It's one of the few lager styles that I do that with as well. I feel like because of with the rise in popularity of West Coast IPA, it became the cool thing to pretend that you hate crystal malt. The reality is there is a place in time where it works really well. Now, am I going to throw crystal malt into my West Coast IPA? No, of course not. I don't like it there. But in a style like Schwarzbier, it really can add some nice texture. And just that, again, another layer of flavor. Also, he only used 3.5% of the grist with C40. Come on. So yeah, that's what I think about that. Now, again, this was, I just want to kind of clarify a little bit about Jason's approach here. He was making this pizza and decided, I'm going to go way out and mill my grains. Why I do that, I'm going to heat up the water. It wasn't the full volume, but he was using one of the early all-in-one units where you did have to do kind of a little bit of a sparge because it didn't have the total, you couldn't fit all the volume of water in the unit itself. But he did some interesting stuff here. He started the milling process of his grain. When he was done, I think he might have stepped off to work on something for dinner, comes back, and the water, it wasn't quite to his preferred strike temperature, but he thought, oh, who cares? It's electric. I'll just keep it turned on while I mash in, right?
So that's pretty awesome, though, because that means that it says here they took 37 minutes to reach his desired mash temp, but you're getting that like kind of a, maybe not a stepped mash, but you're just kind of, slowly elevating through all those mash rests as you go through. So that's actually like a pretty baller German strategy. And don't hate on the C40 because if you called it Karen Munich, nobody'd bat an eye. So,
yeah. Well, and the 37 minutes, just to be clear, he was preheating that water for about 20 minutes or so. It was, I forget what the exact temperature was when he came back and said, you know what, I'm just gonna add these grains now, and then with the grains in there, let it get up to my desired mash temp, which was 152. It took 37 minutes for that mash, not just the wort or the water, to get up to 152. And once it did, he was like, all right, I'm going to call it quits here. So again, this is probably leaning a little bit more into the shoddy than the short, as you will see here in a minute.
Yeah. And after 37 minutes, he proceeds to remove the grain basket and set it up on his all-in-one. And what does he have now awaiting him after this 37 minutes? He has a stuck sparge because the wort's not draining from the basket. This poor guy, he's making pizza. He's trying to do all these things. And the short part of the short and shoddy is kind of out the window at this point because you have a stuck sparge. And so he got some hot tap water to sparge with, and he eventually got it handled, which probably means he had to do some finagling to get that stuff to drain through. And I just really feel for him at this point. And then to like double down, like he's, they say misery loves company. And he decides that after he's done sparging, he's going to throw a spoonful of spent grains into his wort as he's bringing it to a boil. And we all know that this should put off some crazy astringency to boil those grains. We've got all sorts of things going on there. I'm just wondering how his poor little pump on his all-in-one's going to handle it, which I guess we'll get to in a minute. No spoilers, but I'm just like, this poor guy, misery loves company when he's doing this.
Well, and I'll tell you, the first off, you kind of glossed over it. And to me, at least when I tap into like old way of thinking, Marshall, the fact that he used hot tap water, that's coming from a hot water tank. Like I was taught, never do that. Never. Now I've done it since this experience here. But that is like a big no-no. You need to heat up your water and it needs to be the same profile, yada, yada, before he's sitting here with a stuck sparge going, well, maybe if I just throw some hot tap water in there, which gets to like 140 or something. Not even the 170 that we're, Fahrenheit that we're looking for sparge water, but he figured it out. It took him over an hour to fully lauter this batch here and to get the amount of wort that he needed to boil. And so I just think that's fascinating that he did all of that. And then at the end, after all of the struggles, like you said, he takes a spoonful. It wasn't that much, maybe, I don't know, even dripping wet. Maybe it was like 6 ounces of spent grain, but throws it right into this recirculated electric all-in-one system that is now to boil the wort. Good times.
Yeah, and it's one of those big metal spoons that we used to use back in the day for homebrewing. Everybody used to have the big metal spoon to stir with, and it's literally just a big metal spoon, like those long, probably like, I don't know, they're a few feet long, metal spoon full of spent grain. So it is not a lot, but it's a lot. Poor misery loves company. Anyways, so after the hour-long sparge and the throwing of spent grains in coming to a boil, the wort was boiled for just 20 minutes. And he used 20 grams of Magnum at the start of the boil for 20 minutes, 16 grams of Hallertau at 15 minutes, and 16 grams of Hallertau at 5 minutes. I think Hallertau and Magnum make a lot of sense in this, and probably that seems like a pretty big charge of Magnum at 20 grams. But again, when you're only doing a 20-minute boil, you got to kind of amp that up a little bit just to get some of the IBUs that you're looking for. Because again, you can go upwards near 35 IBUs for this style. And so if you want to get close to something up near that, you really do have to kind of bump it up. And I think he was hitting around 22 IBUs is what it was calculated at. So again, you needed something to get there.
Well, and again, for the people who started brewing around the time I did, like 20 plus years ago, there was when it came to hopping a beer, you talked about your flavor addition, your bittering addition, your flavor addition, and your aroma addition, and that was start of the boil, mid boil, end of boil. That's it. So when we reduce the boil, that has to change. At least that the way we think about that changes, right? Because now you are effectively throwing in your bittering addition during the flavor addition part of the boil, right? So is that going to have an effect, or can you get away just by adding more of that bittering addition? In this case, Jason used Magnum. Can you get away with getting the bitterness without any of the other characteristics that you to sort of emulate an earlier addition, bittering hop addition? So who knows? But 20 minutes, we've kind of moved away from the 20-minute boil, and when we do short and shoddy these days, this was done back in 2018. Nowadays, when we do short and shoddy, I think most of us stick with a 30-minute boil. Not that those extra 10 minutes are having a substantial impact, but it does kind of lighten the brew day up a little bit in my experience.
Yeah, the 20-minute boil, I think I did it one time, and it, like when you think, oh, it's just 10 minutes, but it makes everything so hectic. Like again, these brew days, like the fact that he wanted to do pizza on the same day is like blowing my mind. Because normally my short and shoddy brew days go so fast. Like I have trouble like figuring out how I'm going to take care of dinner. Like I really have to have my crap together. So it's like, oh, you're saving all this time, and you are, but you're also making a process a little more hectic than it might need to be. But anyways, he gets to 10 minutes left in the boil. And then he goes on to turn on his recirculation pump. And that is when he realizes that the spoonful of grains might not have been such a great idea because they have clogged his pump. But God bless him. This is where things, again, we've already abandoned the short part of short and shoddy, and we've really leaned heavily into shoddy. But as we've leaned more heavily into shoddy, at this point, he's just like, screw this, and he just turns the system off. He's like, pizza's ready, I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna go eat dinner with my family, and then I'll come back and deal with the scrap after dinner. And so he goes and eats dinner, which is, one of the steps in the article if you want to go read it. And the pizza looks great, by the way. It's a nice pepperoni pizza, homemade crust. For his first try, it actually looks like a really great pizza. I'm kind of wanting pizza right now, even though it's kind of in the morning still here. But he returned, and the wort had chilled on its own down to about 167 Fahrenheit. Or that's around 67 THC, I think. And so he then goes ahead and he pours it into a stainless steel fermenter that he just places on its deck. It's winter in Pebbletime, Colorado, so he's essentially doing a no chill, but it's pretty chilly outside, so it's gonna chill pretty fast out there. And so I just, the whole steps of this, again, stuck pump, just turns it off, goes eats dinner, comes back. It's barely down to 167 Fahrenheit, and then he just pours it into his fermenter and puts it out on the deck. I mean, literally, we were leaning heavily into the Shoddy of the Short and Shoddy series here because there ain't nothing short about any of this.
Yeah. Now it was wintertime in Pueblo, Colorado, where he lives. So, he was just relying on like a quick no chill basically. And it worked. He was able to get it down, relatively quickly to chill that wort. And like you said, he pours it into a fermentation vessel, puts it in a chamber, and then he controls that chamber to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which I thought was great. He's got this cold, icy deck at his house, but he's like, I'm going to warm up this chamber to really go shoddy on this, lager that should be fermented at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But overall, this brew day lasted him about 2.5 hours. This was an early Short and Shoddy article. We hadn't really cinched up our process yet, so he didn't take a note of the exact time he started and the exact time he ended. But it was one evening around dinner time, and if you just add up the time it took him to do everything, you get around 2.5 hours, maybe even a little bit less than that. He did pitch a single can, that shows how long ago this was, of Imperial Yeast L13 Global. And again, through that fermentation chamber, that beer into the chamber at 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22C. And he said that activity was kicking the following day and was pretty much gone the day after that, but he left it there for like 3 or 4 more days. I think in total, the beer fermented for 5 days before he took a hydrometer measurement, showing that it was at 1008. Now, I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, the starting gravity, the original gravity of this wort was at 1039 OG for a 51% brew house efficiency. That is about as low as I think we've seen on a Short and Shoddy, but given all of the hijinks that went on during Jason's brew day, it doesn't surprise me. And then also you add in the weird sparge stuff plus a 20-minute boil. Yeah, 51%. Hey, at least he got over half, but 1039 OG to 1008 FG. That's actually still not that bad, actually,
No, I'm happy you got to 4.1% because that's not too terribly off from like the 4.4 you would be expecting.
Right.
And so really he's not, even with the stuck sparge and probably some poor mash efficiency going on with that, going abbreviated plus stuck. And then the poor, and he might have even added a little more water when he was trying to unclog that thing than he intended. You know what I mean? Because sometimes when you're trying to deal with that, if you're going straight from the household tap, you might have added a little more than he anticipated, just trying to get it unstuck. So, that's very possible. So, between the stuck sparge and the kind of abbreviated boil, I think getting to 4.1% was actually kind of a win for this calamity of a brew session that he had.
Well, and here's the thing, we often, when people comment on our Short and Shoddy, they're like, oh, the number of times that somebody has said something like, you should use a dirty fermentation vessel, and really our goal is to make an excellent beer while cutting corners, not to test out what all we can get away with. I know that that's easy to misinterpret. There is one thing that Jason did, though, where I'm looking at it going, no, not even I would do this. He gravity transferred this fermented Schwarzbier from the fermentation vessel into an open-topped keg that was never purged of CO2. Now, yeah, I used to do that a lot. I made great beer. At least I think they were great beers back then using that process. But we have shown over and over that cold side oxidation is real. That is something all of us at Brülosophy, even when we're going Short and Shoddy, we're still, pressure transferring into a CO2 purge keg. Well, just to add even more shoddiness to this Schwarzbier, Jason did not do that. He just gravity transferred it right out of the fermentation vessel into an open, unsealed keg. And then he put that keg on gas in his keezer. He burst carbonated it overnight and then reduced the gas to serving pressure. And then after, I think it was like 4 or 5 days of cold conditioning, we can like air quotes lagering around that, he started serving it to people for evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like his experience with the fermentation going so fast, all the way to getting it like carbonated up and rolling and serving to people, like 3470 is a monster at 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22°C. It will chew through anything really fast. And so it was probably done in 3 days. He just gave it a couple more. And so the fact that he can, like, again, we don't know what it's going to taste like yet. We haven't gotten there. But the fact that he went and literally like just under 2 weeks turned around a lager is pretty impressive. And as far as like the open keg, yeah, it's not something I would have done, but he's turning around this beer so fast, and it's not like a really hoppy style. You can probably get away with it on this if you're going to turn it around really quick. But again, not something that I would particularly want to chance here. But anyways, he got all that done. And I guess we want to talk about the appearance, right? Because that would be the first thing that we would do is we would take a look at it. And he's got a beautiful picture on the website of it showing up in the snow, which is like really shows you how cold it was when he was putting his fermenter out there. But dark brown with ruby highlights on the edge, light tan foam with good head retention, some haze, but not murky. And it looks like a Schwarzbier more or less. And again, with that quick turnaround, without using finings, I would expect a little bit of haze to be in there. But again, from this picture with the beautiful white snow in the backdrop, it looks gorgeous.
Yeah. And you know, when I think of a murky beer, I think of a beer that is clearly not conditioned long enough. This is not that. This, you know, if you're just quickly looking at it, it looks like a Schwarzbier. If you really pay attention and kind of zoom in on the edges, you can tell that it's not bright, but it's clear. It's like homebrew clear. So for the fact that this beer was only sitting in his keezer for what, a week at best, I think it's pretty telling that yeast just got in there, got out of the way. And in his packaging, while he may not have racked into a CO2 purge keg, it's not like he was intentionally trying to get a bunch of murky stuff, into the serving keg anyways. So, all right. So before we get into the blind taster results, we're going to talk about Jason's impressions, and I'm just going to kind of read a little bit about what he wrote, in terms of his take on this short and insanely shoddy Schwarzbier that he made. He said he was taken by surprise the first time he sampled this Schwarzbier, as it had the crispness he expects from a lager with a backbone of roast and chocolate that he really enjoyed. He perceived a mild bitterness that lingered a bit longer on his palate than he would have liked, but even so, he felt the beer was pretty well aligned with the BJCP description. All in all, he said this short and shoddy Schwarzbier was incredibly crushable and enjoyable, which right off the bat, I trust Jason. He brewed for Brülosophy. I have to believe his assessment is honest and accurate. And the fact that he's sitting there going, despite all the crap I went through in the brewing of this beer, it's actually quite good. That alone impressed me.
Yeah, to go through the trials and tribulations on pizza night of all nights, because pizza night is a holy night. He still managed to make a pretty crushable beer. The one thing that's there is that mild bitterness that lingered on a bit longer, and I don't know what kind of hops he was using and or where he particularly sourced them from or how they were handled. So it's possible he just got something that was a little long in the tooth, or might have been mishandled a little bit to give it a bitterness, or maybe just overdid the Magnum and didn't, and it gave more perceived bitterness than thought would be. But yeah, overall, it sounds like he made a pretty delicious beer. And so that's pretty awesome. But again, it's one thing to talk to Jason about it. We got to figure out what these blind tasters thought.
Yeah, now this was done back in the days where we were still kind of developing the short and shoddy series. I think we had brewed maybe 2 or 3 short and shoddy batches at this point, and we hadn't yet solidified the survey that we currently use today. So instead of telling people the style and giving them the BJCP description like we do now, the first thing that we asked participants on these short and shoddy surveys was to guess the beer style. I'm going to challenge anybody to try to do this. It is so much more difficult than you think it is, way more difficult than I thought it would be. And here's why we don't do it anymore. Again, reminder, 19 tasters, 16 different beer styles were selected by those 19 tasters, with just 3 people coalescing around the same style. So 16 styles, 1 person each, and then 3 of those styles had an additional person. And not a single person thought it was a Schwarzbier. That says nothing about whether or not it was a Schwarzbier. It says more about what people know, and the depth of what they know really about Schwarzbier and all of these various styles. People were picking things like International Dark Lager, Munich Dunkel. One person put Stout. I mean, it's just all over the board. So we ditched that question, but I do think it's fun to kind of look back on these. Now on a more familiar note, we did ask all of the other questions that we still ask these days. In terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters rated the strongest characteristic as being its maltiness, which yielded an average of about 3 out of 5. Then they rated the dryness as a 2.7, while hoppiness was the lowest rated at 2 out of 5. I don't know about you, Will, but that kind of lines up for me for this style.
Yeah, definitely that kind of like dark malt character with that chocolate and coffee. That should be the star of this particular show. And then you also want to be dry and attenuate. So I'm really not surprised. This lines up 100% how I think this should go. And so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And then, so from there, we ask them to go deeper into each one of those characteristics. So in terms of hops, the most prominent characteristic rated by 9 out of the 19 tasters was the earthy characteristic. That doesn't surprise me very much. Another 5 felt the pine resinous hop character was strongest. 2 people went with spicy, and then 1 person each went with floral, berry, and onion garlic. That doesn't make any sense to me given the hops that he used, but everybody perceives things their own way. Nobody endorsed fruity, melon, or thankfully dank caddy.
Yeah, I would have thought maybe because he used Hallertau, you would have gotten more of that kind of floral characteristic up a little higher. But again, this is not a hop forward beer. Like the hops are there and they're allowed to be present and detectable. But again, you're focusing more on those malt characteristics over the hops. So again, the way this kind of laid out is just kind of typical of how I think it would probably lay out for any kind of darker lager that isn't hop forward.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the malt character, 6 out of 19 endorsed roast. 5 felt toasty characteristics kind of led the way. 3 said nutty, and then 2 each went with caramel sweet and chocolate. Only 1 person did cracker bread crust. This is a tough one. I think when with Schwarzbier, your eyes kind of do a lot of the biasing. You see this dark beer and you're automatically going to think roast. That is not to minimize the fact that these tasters may very well have tasted a roasty note, which is appropriate so long as it's not burnt, right, Will?
Exactly. No burnt. As long as it was just like that. And what is roast? Roast isn't really a flavor per se, but when you say roast, you're thinking of like roasted coffee kind of flavor and aroma. And so to me, as with the Schwarzbier, that coffee flavor is really something that you're going after. So I would have thought roast, then maybe chocolate potentially based off this recipe, but roast and toasty, I'd be perfectly happy with that if I was submitting this beer and getting the survey results back.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, I really do believe that a lot of people, it would be impossible for us to just find BJCP national judges to do our surveys. And so what we're surveying are the lay people, are our friends who we know enjoy beer. They may not have the depth of understanding of it that we do. Maybe they've never brewed a batch, but when you see a dark beer, your brain automatically goes to coffee and chocolate, in my opinion. So the fact that he had 5 of those 19 people say that toasty was the lead, that makes a lot of sense to me. So it more or less adds up there. The yeast character or fermentation characteristics, 4 people rated it as clean. 5 people went with esters. 7 people said phenolics. Let's put a pin in that because I think that's interesting. 3 people put sulfur. Again, a little sulfur note in any lager is appropriate, but 3 people to say sulfur led over the other characteristics kind of interest me, but nobody said that it was wild. What are your thoughts on the phenolics taking the cake here in terms of the number of people who rated that as the driving, fermentation character of this beer?
So a lot of people, my beautiful and wonderful wife included, taste a lot of, when they taste roast, they tend to get smoke from it.
Yes. And
smoke is technically a phenolic. And so I think there's just like this kind of palate training with some people that needs to happen, that when you get these roasty characters, what is smoke, what isn't smoke. And if you want to hang out with me and drink a bunch of smoked beers, I can take you through a whole myriad of smoke because I love smoked beers. But they are different. But my wife especially, and I know many others, when they get those really roasty kind of characteristics like coffee and some others, they get smoke is what their mind goes to, or kind of like burn. So maybe, Jason didn't mention any acridity, and I wouldn't expect from that midnight wheat to get acridity or any kind of smokiness, but maybe for some people's palates, it was kind of, again, pushing that roasted character up really high, and so they might have perceived that as smoke.
Well, and the alternative is that this was in some way contaminated, and that's the responsible, party for phenolics or the fermentation temperature. I specifically asked Jason, when we saw this data, I was like, yo, did you get any phenols in this? And he said, absolutely not. It had a little bit more roast character than, maybe a traditional Schwarzbier. So he, like you, kind of presumed that's where people were getting that. This is a tough one to rate, in my opinion. Fermentation character is one of the most difficult parts of a beer evaluation to parse out because, for example, if you taste fruity and the description of esters is fruity, then, you're going to have a handful of people who say, oh, that must be esters. It could also just be the fact that you dry hopped it with Galaxy. You know what I mean? And so it's very difficult to separate those two. I'm not trying to demean or minimize the tasters who did this. I just struggle to accept that this actually had genuine phenols in there that were making it taste like clove or smoke or whatever. So in terms of off flavors, out of 19 people, and despite the crazy shoddiness of this brew day, only 2 people noted perceiving off flavors. One of them said acetaldehyde. The other said metallic. Okay, cool. It's only 2 out of 19. So whether it was there or not, those 2 seem to think it was. Some of my favorite questions, though, are the ones that come at the end. The first one is, how well does this beer represent the style? Now, we did put the BJCP description in there for this one back on that survey. And we ask people, read the description and then just tell us how well you feel like it fits with the style as defined by the BJCP. 2 out of 19 felt it was a 5 out of 5. They actually thought, this lines up really well with the way the BJCP describes Schwarzbier. Another 6 people rated it a 4 out of 5. And then everybody else, 11 more, gave it a 3 out of 5. That's not excellent by any means, but nobody gave it a 2, a 1, or a 0 out of 5. The fact that he brewed this beer the way he did, that he threw those grains in there and let them boil for 20 minutes with the wort, that he didn't quickly chill it, all of those things, and yet still people are saying, you know what, it's a pretty good representation of the style, maybe not perfect. That's pretty interesting to me.
Hey, I've done a few of these, and sometimes if you just get the 3 out of 5, you're pretty happy, especially with some of the corners that you're cutting. And if I had a brew day that was a catastrophic, it wasn't catastrophic failure, he still wound up with beer, but one that was like so bogged down with trials and tribulations and shoddiness, I would be really happy with getting a lot of people going 3 out of 5 or higher. So that's pretty amazing. I think that's awesome. And so kudos to Jason for pulling that off.
I think he was patting himself on the back after this one. The final question is probably the most subjective, which is why we save it for the end, because me and subjectivity. We just ask people how much they like the beer. Now, this is going to be based purely on whether they enjoyed it or not. We're not asking them to say, as a Schwarzbier that, based on your rating of how it represents the style, what do you think of it? We're just saying, did you like drinking it or not? There are going to be people who are capable of actually compartmentalizing how well the beer represents the style from, how much they like it. They may hate the beer. For example, you serve me a Weiss beer. I don't hate Weiss beer, but my preference on that beer, you give me the best one ever, I'm probably still going to rate it a 3 or a 4 out of 5 in terms of my preference, tops, but I could give it a 5 out of 5 if it represents the style well. I have a feeling people do that with this preference rating. 0 out of 19 people gave it a 5 out of 5, so nobody loved it, but 7 people thought it was good and gave it a 4 out of 5. Another 10 people rated it a 3 out of 5 for their preference. 2 people rated it a 2 out of 5, and then nobody rated it a 1 or a 0 out of 5. So nobody loved it, but nobody hated it either.
Yeah, and again, I think it just depends on, preferences and palates. And I don't know the preferences and palates of all the people that tasted it, but, it seems like maybe they weren't the biggest dark lager fans, which is, understandable and acceptable. But again, the fact, if I'm saying something was a 3 out of 5, that means it wasn't a dumper. And that's solid for me.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, it may very well be that my Schwarzbier or your Schwarzbier made using marginally less shoddy methods. I'm not throwing grains in there. I'm racking into a CO2 purge keg, all that stuff, that these tasters would have enjoyed it more. Actually, I sort of lean into that. I'm sure they would. But the fact that they didn't hate it, I think just shows that just how flexible you can be in your brewing. And yeah, I get that there's a lot of people in this hobby who really, what they get out of it is being super duper anal about the way that they're brewing and approaching these styles, especially when it comes to the traditional approaches. you do you, enjoy it. But man, if you're looking to get away with a quick brew day, and maybe you're running short on time, and you just want to have a nice, clean, crushable Schwarzbier on tap, you can do this in a less shoddy way that Jason did and probably turn out a very good beer. I think that's awesome. Again, not the best example of Schwarzbier, but considering the trouble Jason ran into during the short and shoddy brew day, I feel like it was a success. He didn't dump it. He drank it. Him and his friends enjoyed it. So that's what matters. Now, we did get a couple of reader comments. The first one comes from David Stelting, who says, I just knew this one was going to be the one that made everyone say, quote, see, you have to do things the traditional way. You must follow the Reinheitsgebot for the quality of your beer and for the glory of das Vaterland. Unquote. And then he says, I sit here now realizing how far we've come in this hobby, how much ingredients have improved. Things are just more durable now than they used to be. They are engineered to perform. And that, more than anything else, in my opinion, is why these short and shoddy brew days work out. Because I'm here to testify, if you had done this with grains in the early 1990s, that beer would have tasted like a tea bag. Now, I don't know about you, Will. I never brewed in the 90s, but I did brew in the early 2000s. I even question that claim. I think the belief back then was probably even stronger than it is nowadays. But yeah, there have been some improvements in the way grains are malted and how, how easily they can be converted nowadays. But did they taste that different? I don't know.
Well, again, what would you have done? Use slightly under modified grains versus more heavily modified? I think the flavor would have still been there. I don't think Dingman's malt has really changed what they've been doing in the last, 30 years on that much anyways. I think malting has been a pretty consistent industry for a long time. So I'm not really worried about the grains. I think the one thing that has probably improved the most, and again, I didn't brew in the 90s, but even in the last however long I've been doing this, has been yeast quality and the quality of yeast that we're getting and how fresh it is and how many cells there are. Like, we've come a really long way from the yeast that was barely refrigerated or taped to the bottom of a can in a kit. And so I think the yeast has been one of the really big things. But again, knowing your process, if you know your process and you know what you're doing, then you can thrive in these short and shoddy methods. And I think the best way to thrive in short and shoddy is just to get more and more experience in doing it. And the only way to do that is just to go out there, and then you kind of know where you want to push the short or the shoddy and where you want to reel back on it a little bit. Similar to like Jason pushed I don't want to have a lid on my keg and pressure transfer. And that's not something I'm so willing to do or you're so willing to do. And again, the Reinheitsgebot, it's a great idea. It's kind of cool thing to talk about. It's really fun to say, but as far as like something that I want to ascribe to for my brewing practices, again, that precludes you from treating water. That precludes you from like adding any kind of adjuncts. I'm assuming, some yeast nutrients, you'd have to find some way to make that a part of your malt or your yeast process. So again, there's a lot of things that Reinheitsgebot kind of precludes from the brewing process. And if I want to add some gypsum to my beer to give it a drier finish, then so be it. That violates Reinheitsgebot, but I'm okay with that. So let's not get hung up on the Reinheitsgebot. It's a great idea. I like it, and it's fun to talk about, and it's, again, really, really fun to say. But again, let's not get hung up on it to the point where it keeps us from making good beer.
Well, and on that note, I think a lot of I don't want to be too presumptuous here, but when traditionalists, even those who are younger than you and me, Will, who get into brewing and really just want to stick to the classic way of brewing, when they see us, blaspheming by brewing these short and shoddy beers, I think part of their, I would hope at least, that it's not just hate for hate's sake, but part of their hate comes from that this idea that if you don't do it the traditional way, you're going to make a lower quality product. That's the concern, right? It's not going to taste as good. Well, one, who determines that is the person drinking it. So what's perfect to me could be imperfect to you in terms of something as subjective as beer, right? But also, if you're thinking about, but if you were to submit it to competition, well, first off, every one of those judges is their own subject. There is very little objectivity in judging. I know that I'm in the minority of people who will publicly say that. I am a judge. I've judged enough to know that it's not really for me because of how subjective it is. And I love that people enjoy it. But when you're sitting there and you've got 5 Schwarzbiers in front of you, none of them are going to taste identical. None of them. Most of them are going to taste mostly the same, but they won't be identical. You'll be able to nitpick out little differences. And it is the judges, the 2 judges on that panel, it's their job to try to figure out which one they feel is the closest match to what the BJCP describes. Does that mean that it is universally better than the other one in terms of preference? Absolutely not. I will argue with anybody to the death on that. It doesn't. And so you can make these short and shoddy beers that everybody loves and submit them to competition and actually do really well. I just 2 weeks ago, I heard back from a brew club member who submitted a short and shoddy beer, I forget what the style was, into a competition and took best of show with a short and shoddy beer. Imagine that. It's you got to broaden your horizons a little bit. We're not saying everybody needs to brew this way. I couldn't care less how people brew, but for those who are, have kids and work and all of that and still want to engage in this hobby, to be able to go out and knock out a quick brew day in an hour and a half or 2 hours and be done with it and have a nice, delicious keg of beer on tap afterwards, this is a really, really solid option. We have shown that over and over again. And even with how nuts this brew day was for Jason, he yet again showed this beer was good enough to keep on tap and to drink. All right. Final comment comes from somebody who calls themselves Mick Stanley. And they say, in exploring recipes, I found Schwarzbier a neglected style among homebrewers. I'm currently conducting my own experiment with the style by splitting a batch of wort between a lager and an ale yeast to explore their respective influence on a Schwarzbier recipe. Now, I wish I'd kept better notes so I could share the results in the manner you have. I've got something to say about this. Will, what about you?
You're kind of looking more at like almost an alt beer if you start using ale yeast, in my opinion. So the difference between an alt beer and a Schwarzbier, I mean, there are differences, but they're not that far apart. And so, I mean, you're kind of creeping into alt beer territory, which is also kind of fun. Although I don't know how much, I'd have to go back and look up how much roast you're supposed to have on that. But again, you don't want burnt in your alt beer either. So I think going back to its roots and kind of going back to that old ale yeast and figuring out if you got a clean fermenting strain ale yeast versus the lager, I think you could get pretty similar results depending on what strains you're using.
All right, so here's what I'm going to finish up on. Mick Stanley, you're in a little bit of luck. This may have been 7 years ago, but I've got some anecdote for you here. We have not done a formal ale versus lager yeast comparison on Schwarzbier specifically. But one of my first fermentation temperature experiments that I did was on Schwarzbier, and it wasn't using a lager yeast. It was using the popular PJ for a Kolsch yeast, White Labs WLP 029 German Ale, which is absolutely Saccharomyces cerevisiae, not Pastorianus. This is an ale yeast. Now, it is a notably clean fermenting ale yeast. And people will say that about Chico, and people will say that about other American-style ale yeast. But it is not a lager yeast. This was all the way back in January of 2015. Brülosophy wasn't even a full year old yet. And I was blasphemously using that specific strain to make all kinds of mock lagers because I believed that making traditional lagers was too difficult and that using lager yeast fermented any warmer than 52 degrees Fahrenheit or 11 C would result in this super fruity, estery, out of style lager, right? This was before I changed my ways. Now, those beers, and in fact, I did more than just Schwarzbier. I was using Kolsch yeast for so many different, quote, mock lagers. I would just call them what they are nowadays, but they turned out so good. People were thinking that would come over and drink. I was in my homebrew club members would come over, they'd drink my beer. They were thinking that I was just this like phenom lager brewer, and I was using Kolsch yeast fermented at like 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 C. You can do that. My thing, though, is that you can also use lager yeast and just ferment it like an ale. I know people will scoff at that, but it works insanely well. Pick out a robust lager strain, something like, L13 Global or the Weihenstephan strain, Augustiner, Grupo Modelo, their yeast. They work so good. Are they going to give you the same exact characteristic as if you fermented them cold? Maybe not, but also maybe so. Give it a go. I think you'll be shocked. It is so easy to get away with making these types of beers easily nowadays with what we know about brewing and beer. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Will, did you have any final words before we wrap up?
I just want to say, I think this is a very delicious, a very underrated style, and I would encourage anyone to go out there, especially in these cooler months that we're currently experiencing, and enjoy you a nice dark lager, because why not? Schwarzbier is so fantastic.
Absolutely. Don't forget to check out the rad content Martin's creating over at The Brülosophy Show, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/@The Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brülosophy Show. No umlaut needed. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy Schwarzbier. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middle.